The subtext of these 5 modernizations is that China needs to transform its development model and emphasize these kinds of values.
I'd say that China is facing unprecedented headwinds, but as the saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Modernization has a long tradition in Chinese contemporary and modern history. As we all know, Deng Xiaoping started with the 4 modernizations in 1977, and that really put the country onto the path of enormous development, of modernization, of course, and it turned China into, I would say, already moderately prosperous society. And without the 4 modernizations of Deng Xiaoping in the late 1970s, the development we saw in the 1980s, 1990s, up to the very present time would probably not happen. To reconnect to these modernizations, that is exactly what I think Xi Jinping had in mind when he announced his 5 modernizations, to reconnect to Deng Xiaoping and his successors.
The subtext of these 5 modernizations is that China needs to transform its development model and emphasize these kinds of values in order to reach the higher stages of development that it's seeking for 2035 in the middle of the century, given both new challenges and opportunities. And so these values should be the guides that help structure the next steps, the next stage.
Given the past and ongoing challenges presented by COVID-19, the deterioration in international relations and the resulting shock to global supply chains, etc., I'd say that China is facing unprecedented headwinds. But as the saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
I think that one point that Beijing has communicated in various ways is that the international situation will pose a lot of risks for the next 5 to 10 years. And the key question is how to manage these risks without losing ground, while still growing economically, while still building China's strength, while still progressing towards the 2035 and middle century goals. Now, there are some concerns that a worst case scenario is that the United States is trying to bait China into a conflict over Taiwan, perhaps similar to what the US did vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia. But even if this worst case scenario is avoided, we can already see America's very aggressive containment strategy unfolding. But the latest major attack coming from this strategy is trying to cut China off from advanced chips in order to cripple China's high-tech economic development, its industrial upgrading, and its national security, all at a time when China is counting on these developments to lead its economic reforms. And really, these efforts are at the center of its priorities for the next 5 to 10 years.
Above all, what I think comes into it is, of course, also the economic competition with the Western world. And here that economic competition should be much more constructive rather than competitive in a very harsh and perhaps difficult and unconstructive way. And here is lots of room for cooperation between China and the Western world and between the Western world and China. And if that cooperation becomes more constructive than it has been in the recent few years, then I believe Chinese progress, Chinese modernization will be much more successful than if that cooperation is not going to happen.
So about other countries, every country is different. But for many developing countries, especially those hard hit by the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, the soaring inflation and the like, China's model provides an attractive alternative path compared to Western ones that often have more onerous conditions attached. China specifically has a proven record of success. For example, China lifted 850 million people out of extreme poverty, something never before accomplished in the history of the world. Countries can see that rhetoric, words alone, aren't the true measure of success. Achievements are.
The world right now is struggling. It's struggling from, again, these sort of endless cycles of financial crisis, of rising geopolitical tensions, of big power competition or great power competition, of a war or conflict, depending on how you want to phrase it, in Ukraine. This idea that China is saying, listen, there is a different way, there is a different path, and we're ready to join you on that path, or you're welcome to join us on that path. And, let's consider doing things differently instead of going around in circles or going down the drain, as appears to be the case in terms of these broader conflict that won't stop but keep getting worse.